The first thing I'd like to ask, because we did touch on, some of the issues that you guys have dealt with Red Dog and whether it was a family film or not, but the first question I have is for you, Kriv, which is that you don't seem like the obvious choice to do a family film. I mean, your films like Blacktown, Boxing Day, Lucky Country, they're all pretty, talk about dark and edgy. And if someone said to me, who would be the most obvious family film director in Australia, you would not be the obvious choice. So how did you get involved, and at what point in the stage, in development, did you get involved?
That's a really good question. Okay, I'm having to kind of get back into the memory banks here, but basically in 2009, I'd just finished Lucky Country, and my agent sent me the screenplay for Red Dog, and apparently it had been going around. And I actually had to go to LA. I went to LA and I met Nelson Moss, the producer at the, actually I was in San Francisco. I met Nelson at the Zoetrope Cafe. And I said, look, I really love the script. And I asked him, so what, I can see it, and I know I can do this, but why me? And basically, Nelson had been trying to get the film off the ground for about 5 years. It was originally going to be a $30 million film with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman, and with an American director. Because the script is actually written by an American, he's Canadian actually, Dan Taplitz. And Nelson's got an interesting background. He actually spent a lot of time in LA, and he worked a long time as an executive. And for a long time he worked with Ivan Reitman's company. He worked hand in hand with Ivan Reitman, and Ivan Reitman obviously made Ghostbusters, but he also made the Beethoven films. So Nelson came from from an American studio background. But there was a certain point where he knew he couldn't get the film off the ground in the shape or the scale that he originally intended. And for him, the turning point was that Warner Brothers really loved the book because it was based on a book, Louis de Bernier's book, Red Dog. But the caveat was, look, we love it, we love the script, but can you set it in Texas? And that was, $30 million, price, they were ready to sign the check. And Nelson, to his credit, said, no, this is a Western Australian story. I can't, because he's from Western Australia as well. So I can't do that. So he came back, moved back to Australia, and I think was trying to get the film off the ground. And at that point, it was post-GFC, so, the whole film industry, as I said before, the whole business model was collapsing, budgets, the whole infrastructure of how films were financed and made was completely transformed. And I'd made this film called Boxing Day for $175,000, which I don't know if any of you have seen, but it's not Red Dog. And Nelson said, look, you're the guy, you can do films for a low budget, and you can do something with impact for a low budget. And I went, well, that's fair enough. So that's kind of how, but we also, Nelson and I, in that meeting, in that well, I think it was actually quite a fateful meeting, in that cafe, we talked a lot about, and we realised we'd actually had very similar childhoods, and we probably saw the same films at the same time when they were released, and we found a kind of very much a common ground of the kinds of films we loved and the kind of film we wanted to be. So yeah, that's basically how it started. But there's a funny story though, I won't give it too long. When Nelson took the film to the funding bodies, they went, Kriv, Stenders? No, you're mad. Like, what? So there was actually quite a lot, Nelson was telling me he's probably fed me one story, but basically there was resistance. And what we had to do, we did this, there was also a question about whether we could elicit a performance out of a dog. And so what we did is we killed two birds with one stone. We went out, and Nelson financed this small little shoot. We did a little doco shoot, and part of that was this screen test that I did with the dog to say, hey, I'm a funny guy. I'm not an angsty auteur. And yes, we can get a performance out of the dog. And that little trailer, that little screen test, was really the key that unlocked the whole film for both Nelson and myself, but also to the financiers. I think they could see, yeah, okay, let's take a risk. And it was a risk, all along the way. I think Screen Australia took a big risk on me and on the film, and Roadshow did as well. So it's it was just one of those great sort of opportunities.
That's fantastic. And I think you can see that test on YouTube, can't you? I'm sure I've seen that. Yeah. It's very funny. You mentioned that you fell in love with the script. What was, and also the films that you were saying you and Nelson had sort of grown up and seen the same films and liked them. And I think you've mentioned, in other places, you've mentioned Lassie and Storm Boy as sort of references, and the fact that you liked the fact that the animals didn't talk. Yeah. Is that sort of where you were coming from in terms of the dog and what the expectation was? It
was just a beautiful script. Dan is a great writer, and it's just one of those effortless screenplays that was just lean and muscular, and I just love the concept. I love the idea. I love the actual gimmick. The trick of the story was that it was a story about stories, and that it was the whole film revolved around this evening in a pub where all these characters started to tell their story about this dog, and I just love that as a format. And I met Dan actually in LA, and I knew them. He said, look, basically it's Amarcord. And I went, I love Amarcord. I would love to make an Australian Amarcord. And that was again, the other all these little keys that unlocked all these sort of entry points into the film for me. So yeah, it was very much, when I read the script, I just loved it was really visually, I could see it. I love the compartmentalized little stories. So each story could be its own little mini movie with its own stylistic flourish. It was a chance to sort of work in a completely, as I said, in a key or a register, like slightly heightened comedic register that I'd loved, but I'd never done before. And they're the films that I've loved ever since I was a kid. And as I said, you're tapping into that beautiful, rich reservoir that we have of Australian cinema.
Great. Seph, at what point did the project come to you?
Project had been around, as Kriv said, for a while. My first interaction was with it as an intern. It came through Village Roadshow Pictures as a potential project to get involved with as part of the Warners at that point. And I remember we didn't get it. We simply didn't get the project at that point. And then it kept coming back. Graham Burke, who's head of the whole kit and caboodle over at Village Roadshow, in conjunction with the Kirby brothers, was an enormous fan and supporter of Red Dog, and stalwart in his support of it through the years, and a stalwart supporter of Nelson. So it was a project that kept coming back to us until the point where it all kind of coalesced. And it was 2009 when.
Tell me, was the fact that it was based on a book by an internationally best-selling author, was that a compelling reason to consider doing it, or do you not really even worry about the book market when it comes to something like that?
A book market can be an incredibly compelling reason to do a film. I would give you Mao's Last Dancer and the enormous sales it had in Australia. And that's any time you can pre-brand a film where you have some sort of emotional connection to a piece of work before it comes out, it helps us tremendously in terms of the risk analysis around the film. But that was not the case with this book. It wasn't as well known outside of Western Australia as we would have liked to be. So it wasn't, in this case, the book sales weren't impacting our decision making around it.
Interesting. Kriv, I'm really interested to know how closely you stuck to the script when you were shooting, and what sort of changes you might have had to make because of budget, weather, whatever.
Well, that's a really good question, because Nelson, even though he took a punt on me, I very soon learned through the process that he's what I call the biological father of the film. It's his baby, and I'm the stepdad. So I kind of got that. I worked that out pretty early in the relationship, and it was great though. I love directing and I love collaborating, and he made it very clear that this script is perfect. You're not going to change anything. And but what was great is that eventually, I was able to talk to Nelson and Dan primarily about the ending and about really configuring that ending to. There wasn't actually, I think from memory, there wasn't a graveyard scene. and I was very adamant that we have a scene where the community come together and we see the dead dog. And that was something that even when we shot it, there was talk about taking it out. But my point is that I storyboarded virtually the whole film for Nelson. He needed a lot of assurance that I was telling the story the right way. And, I made sure that I shot, covered, blocked the scene as exactly as it was written. But it was kind of easy because Dan is a great writer. And Dan's also a film director. And Dan and I got on really well. And Dan came to set the first part of the shoot and sort of saw what I was dealing with and made suggestions and adapted things. And there was a certain sort of flow, we couldn't do exactly how it was written because we just couldn't logistically do things. But it was very much the first time I'd really worked what I call it was, up until then my films were partly improvised, and I would roll with the punches. But this was the first time I thought, okay, I'm going to be a commercial film director here. I'm really going to do my job. I'm going to be as precise as possible. So it was very much a technical exercise as well. And that was great because the dog and because of all the logistics of getting the dog and the cat, all of that, we had to break it all down into little pieces and do it as precisely as we could.
Right. So did you actually do a director's draft with Dan, or was it a case more of, was there a period of a couple of weeks where the two of you were together in a room going through the script page by page?
No, I just I read the script and I had about 3 key notes, which was to do with Nancy. I felt she had to be a stronger, I can't even remember what it was. That's right. The truck driver that came in, I felt that relationship had to play out. It had to have a conclusion. In the original script, he just came in and they didn't get together at the end. I felt that there was a journey there for her. That was one note, and the note about the ending, I think, and then something else, I can't remember. But there were 3 key notes, which is what I always love about a good script. If it's good, it doesn't need to be changed. Only needs to be enhanced. So Nelson and Dan were open to that. We incorporated that, and then we went out and financed the film.
At that point, did you know this was a family film? And this is actually going to be a question for both of you.
Well, this is interesting, Seph. My memory of it was that it was going to be a family film, but not for kids. Per se, not for children,
right?
Directly, but it was going to be, like a.
So a sort of 3.5 quadrant film.
Well, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I didn't really think about quadrants, but I just thought it was going to be a comedy. Mm-hmm. And at that point there was Happy Feet. That was the film that, even though that is a children's film, the Babe films. But we knew we were going to go towards that kind of audience, and that audience was there in some shape or form. And then I think when we tested the film, I think you guys were really surprised at how broadly it played across all 4 quadrants. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we did this very expensive Burgent test at Village Southland, equivalent of VMAX cinemas today, seated 500 people, and the question of the test was, who is this movie primarily for, so that we can weight our marketing spend to the right demographic that responds to this film in the best possible way. And it was totally inconclusive. Everyone who saw the film rated the film. I think we got 91%, which in these tests is extraordinary. It's a really high number that was indistinguishable.
And this is how naive I was. I'd never had film tested before. I went 91. Oh, you get 100. It was getting creepy. You can't believe.
Like 60, 55. It was like wow. But didn't help us in terms of which turned out to be a great thing. It was the first indication we had of what type of film we were dealing with, and it's a great credit to you and what you said in the previous session about the tone with which you shot this film, and that's not always in the screenplay. That was a conscious choice. That test video that was done initially to sell into the film bodies, the biggest thing I can say about my contribution to this film is we remastered that, blew it up, and used it as our teaser trailer that wound up playing for 4 or 5 months in cinemas, and kept telling audiences, this is the tone. Even if that has no footage of the actual film in it, this is the tone of the film that we're going to present to you. So they knew at that point what they were walking into.
So if the tests and all that, though, were inconclusive in terms of what your demographic was, what did you tell your marketing department?
Well, good luck. We didn't know. We didn't know. Why Red Dog is such a sea change is you have to put yourself in the mindset of pre-Red Dog, which was we can't sell family films in Australia during the school holiday period. That period is completely owned by Hollywood tentpole, either live-action Harry Potter or Pixar huge animation spectaculars, and we're dead. We're not going to compete in that space. So what we have here is what do we do? And the first idea was, okay, we'll go towards the end of the Easter school holiday period and we'll try and pick up some remnant of a family audience, but really this is going to appeal to an older demographic that just likes this gentle film about a dog. And that is where our marketing department originally went. And then what we found was this latent hunger for family content that was Australian. But it was a word of what we got, what we was so lucky about this in terms of marketing, was that word of mouth kicked in for us. So initially we had a strong opening weekend, but then we were doing way above average business during weekday day trade. Weekday day trade is retirees, people with disposable time and disposable money. They came in, they saw the film, they loved the film, and they told their adult children with children that they could go take their kids to this film, or they went back and took their kids to the film. And as we saw, and now we track this daily, like hourly. So as we saw that happen, we pivoted our marketing campaign, and we had the confidence to spend. And as this was going, we were changing our marketing campaign to broaden out to the family audience that we're talking about today.
So was the original the original release date was in Easter, and then what did it change to? It was.
So it was originally Easter, or end of Easter school holidays. We thought we'd get the last week of Easter school holidays, and then Thor, with his mighty hammer wielded by Chris Hemsworth, landed on that date. And we were spooked by that because Chris Hemsworth is Australian, and we wanted to be the Australian story in the market. We felt if there's a Chris Hemsworth tentpole film there, we better move. So we moved to this innocuous August 4th date, but in doing so, we lost what we thought were our two best assets in talent, Rachel Taylor and Josh Lucas. What we had left was Coco the dog, and Nelson's willingness to tour Coco. So the campaign we came up with was to make Coco a star. We toured Coco, who became the front page news of the Rockhampton Times and Townsville Advertiser and the Geelong Bee, and people started. We actually minted a star in the dog, and the difference, the palpable difference, was in that test audience where it tested very strongly without positioning and without a campaign. Once people felt an emotional connection to the dog, they reacted to the movie differently. It was tears. There's this connection. It was about me and my dog, and people identified with that dog as though it was their dog, and they felt they knew the dog because the dog had been through their hometown, and they'd read about the Coco experience, and that was transformative, I think, for the campaign.
So interesting. Kriv, is it true? I read somewhere that you had actually worked with this dog before.
No, in Lucky Country, we had a Kelpie in that film called Dusty. And when we were making Red Dog, we lost. I kept on saying, look, we need a double dog. We need a really good second pictured double dog all throughout pre. And I said, look, there's this great dog that I work with in Adelaide. It's called Dusty or Rusty. Sorry, Dusty. I can't even remember. Dusty, and we should. And I kept on telling Luke, the animal trainer, just call the guy up. It's on my call sheet. Here's his number. His name's Danny. Call him up. I don't know why, but Luke, animal trainers are their own, they're harder to work out than animals themselves. But he would resist and resist and resist, and eventually we were kind of like, we have to have a second picture dog because we had 2 units shooting the cat fights and stuff like that. So we had to have 2 dogs because we couldn't have the same dog in the same place, 2 places at the same time. And eventually we got in touch with Danny, and we got in touch with Rusty, and Rusty was a perfect double. It turns out that he was Coco's brother. From the same litter. And a little bit of trivia, the poster image you see, that's not Coco.
Oh, you're
Or not on the
kidding.
poster. I think that's Coco, but on the poster it's Dusty.
Oh my God, movie
Yeah.
magic.
Yeah.
So was there, I mean, because I was wondering about CGI and whether you had the budget to do any, whether there was any that you needed because you were working with an animal or several animals?
Well, that was one of the things I loved about when I read the script. I went, God, this is great, because this isn't a dog that talks, and it doesn't have to do extraordinary things. All it has to be is just be a dog.
Right.
And I thought that was beautiful. I thought, wow, right, a dog that doesn't talk. But then, we had the red cat sort of subplot that is woven throughout the film, and these kind of ridiculous dog-cat fights. And I knew that they were the ones we knew that we would have to sort of do some level of CG to, but more in terms of split screen and just manipulating the shots. So there was an allocation set aside for that, but it wasn't really. We deliberately didn't want to go too far with the CG because there's a film Cats and Dogs and obviously Babe. We felt that had been done, but we were kind of coming from a much more authentic, grounded place. And then what was fun, what I said before about what I liked about the script was that, okay, well, I can go a little bit Looney Tunes with all the cat stuff, so I can heighten a bit and use the comic, cartoony style to actually get around some hairy, technical things.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So is it true that it is as hard as they say to work with animals and children, right? Or does it depend on the handler?
It's the handler. The handler's the animal's easy. It's the handler you got to deal with. No, Luke was fantastic. But no, it is challenging. It is, and you have to be patient. But filmmaking is always about problem solving. And filmmaking, every day there's a problem, even if you're not working with animals. There's always issues. Is there enough time? There's always something that goes wrong, but what you do, what I love about the process is that you adapt, and you, as I said before, you constantly reverse engineer. So we would, thankfully we were shooting the film on digital, so we could shoot a lot. We shot with 2 cameras, and again, a lot of it was we used green screen and we used split screens for just very simple things like the dog just looking out, from a shot from behind. You think that's simple. It's actually very difficult because the dog's got to be looking at the trainer. That's how you get an eye line. So we had to put Luke behind a green screen on location and then paint it out so he's looking straight ahead. So a lot of things like that we did. And then the thing with the dog though, it's really interesting. You do have to cast the dog. And same with the new film. We had to find a dog that is like a human. They've got to look great. They've got to be photogenic, and there are dogs that aren't photogenic. They look weird. It's a dog, but that dog is handsome. That one's ugly. And we found this beautiful dog, Phoenix, beautiful dog. And again, the second thing is that they've got to have charisma. There's got to be something there. So when they look at you, what's great about what I love about the Red Dog films is that it's what you were saying before, you project yourself or your emotion onto that canvas of that face, and all it's doing is just looking at you. And it's the classic Podovkin experiment. We have the man staring. It's the same footage of the man looking, but the context of what he's looking at changes the meaning of the shot. So, but you've got to have a good-looking dog, and also a dog that is not just that there is a soul there, that there is a spark, and that's what I call the charisma, the X factor. And Coco had that, so does Phoenix. So yeah.
So yes, tell us a bit more about Red Dog True Blue and how that was at the very beginning of Red Dog. Did you imagine that you would do a sequel or prequel or another film?
No, let me be clear. We did not know what we had with Red Dog. That was to pretend otherwise would be fatuous. But it was. Well, I'll say because probably you can't be. It was their idea. What's terrific about Red Dog to me is that it's an authentic, it's more than a story about a dog. It is a story, as Kriv said earlier, about community. The original Red Dog is the story of the birth of the mining community in the Pilbara region, and it paints in the best possible light that community and its origins and the people who populated that town. Cracking an authentic sequel to what was a very contained book and based on a true dog, was going to be nearly impossible. There's a lot of thought around it, but when Blue Dog came along, the genius was that 15 kilometers away, there was this whole other thing happening with the death of cattle ranching. The 100 years cycle of what was going on there in Australia was coming to an end of what it had been as the mining industry was coming up. And to find that and realize there was another story to tell about something equally transformative happening in the Australian landscape at that time, and still be able to wrap it around the dog in a very authentic way, I thought, wow, that was amazing.
So whose idea was that?
Well, Dan Nelson and I, we talked a lot about what the next story could be, and one thing that Dan and I started talking about, pretty soon after the film was released, we had this idea about, okay, let's do Citizen Kane. Let's do a story about kind of like There Will Be Blood, but let's do an Australian story about a Lang Hancock kind of character who has a dog, and that's his Rosebud. And it was going to be a saga about this farmer who becomes, an ore miner and becomes rich, but even though he's got all the wealth in the world, his family hate him, all he has ultimately in is the love of his dog. That was going to be the story. And Dan and I got really excited. We said, yeah, this is... And then we realised that anything to do with the Hancocks or anything that alluded to that was going to be a fucking nightmare. And Nelson is from WA. Nelson has known that family since he was a kid. He said, we're not going to go there. No way. So a few years passed, and then toward the end of 2013, Dan pitched us this idea of a prequel, of an origin story set on a cattle station at a really critical period in Australian history with the, basically the changing of the cattle over, but also the employment of paid work. So the end of the whole, the Indigenous, the idea of the what was it? When you had Indigenous jackaroos working on farms for no pay, so equal pay basically. Equal pay. And when that came in, that just transformed not only that industry, but it transformed Australia. So it was a critical turning point. And what I love about the Red Dog films is that they look at history, they look at our Australian history, so and put it in the context of a family film. And that's what I mean. There's so many great stories out there. So this was a story that had a genius about it because it wasn't Red Dog. It was none of the characters from the first film, but it was the only constant was the landscape and that dog. And Dan's screenplay, he pitched it to us, and within 3 months, he wrote, this has never happened to me before, he wrote literally a word-perfect screenplay. One draft. It was just flawless.
Don't tell them that.
It can happen.
Very rare.
It can happen.
Very rare.
Very rare. But and he did tweak it. There were some subsequent drafts. But I don't want to give too much away because I want you to see the film and enjoy it. But there's a very clever device that opens the film and closes the film, which I don't want to give away. And the great thing is as well is that you'll be questioning, is it Red Dog or is it another Red Dog? So we've done something that is sort of it'll really appeal to people hopefully who've seen the first film and love the first film, but it's a standalone film. You wouldn't have to have seen Red Dog to enjoy Red Dog True Blue. So
tell me, did you at that point you obviously knew you were going to be making a family film where you didn't really know that with the first one, right? So did that mean you treated the material any differently or directed the film differently? Well, this is the big thing. This is why this was the big realization that we made when
when the film came out and we realised, like, you know, what was so cool was to have my son's friends say, your dad directed Red Dog. And what we all realised, Nelson, all of us, realised, oh my God, this film really plays to kids. Kids loved it, you know. And one of the most beautiful things I got an email from a woman who has a very severely autistic son. And she said he's 13 and he's never cried. And that night they saw Red Dog on TV and he cried. And she said, I just want to thank you for that, because he could empathise with the dog. And I thought, wow, that's such a great thing, because what we're dealing is we're talking about heavy themes. We're talking about life and death and the cycle of life. I mean, what better way to teach children something that is part of life is death, and that it's a beautiful thing, that it's a normal thing, that's not something to be scared of, to accept it as part of life. And what was great about Blue Dog was that we could confidently now go in and have a child as a protagonist, lead character, and also bring an adult audience with us. So we've kind of got the best of both worlds now, hopefully. So it is very much a children's film. I think kids are going to love it. I hope they will. There's a lot in it for them, but it still has all the nostalgia, all the heart, all the humour, I think, and all the character and the richness and the period detail that an adult audience will appreciate as well.
Fantastic.
Hopefully. I mean, this is all. I mean, you might see and go, wasn't as good as Red Dog.
You did that very well.
Well, I'm also...
No media training necessary for you. Let's just go.
You've got nothing to say about this, clearly. No, I mean, it's funny because as soon as I heard you were doing a sequel, I actually said to my daughter, oh, great, you can see that one. Because when she heard that Red Dog died in the first one, she actually said, you mean he didn't just kill Bambi's mother, he killed Bambi? And I said, that's exactly what he did, which was very upsetting. But with a prequel, I guess, live on.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Did you have, I'm hoping you had a bigger budget on the second film, or did you?
Probably just slightly more, but you know, with inflation, I guess, and with the crazy way this game changes, it's pretty comparable. They're pretty much one-on-one.
How long was your shoot on Red Dog and on True Blue? How many?
8 weeks. About 8 weeks.
8 weeks.
Yeah, 6 to 8 weeks.
Do you think that was enough?
Yeah. I mean, I think that was great. Actually, it's really good. You know, and it was, again, Dan's script was a shorter script. It wasn't as complex as the first film. First film was really, you know, there was a lot of moving parts in that film, a lot of characters, a lot of stories to get right. This is a much leaner, simpler story. It's a much more classical kind of film. It's much more, it's sort of purer, I think. And it was all one location. And this location we shot at is incredible. I mean, that landscape up there, the Pilbara landscape where we shot, it's Karratha Station, which is what Karratha's actually named after. It's a very famous, it was originally a sheep station, but it's got these amazing rocks. It's kind of like our Monument Valley, you know what I mean? It is just unbelievable. And when Jeff and I, the DOP, we turned up there on the first recce day, we'd just seen photographs of it, we were just, our jaws dropped. We just went everywhere there's a shot, and everywhere looked fucking awesome. And it was all within, you know, 1 kilometre or 2 kilometres of each other. So we were able to make that shooting schedule work really well. So we could actually perfect the scenes. We could be bold, you know, we could have really great camera moves, and we could be a little bit more, you know, really bring a cinematic quality to it.
So one of the things that really interested me about Red Dog was the fact that the story's told from the dog's point of view in one way. I mean, the dog is definitely the hero, but it sounds like in Red Dog True Blue, you've got a little boy who's the hero, or is he the co-protagonist with the new dog?
He's probably the co-protagonist, but I think it's the same as Red Dog in that Red Dog is just the dog, and he's the observer, and he works within the other characters' stories, and doesn't necessarily change anything or affect anything, but witnesses everything, and therefore is kind of the audience. And again, you project onto the dog, you project onto what the dog's feeling and how he's reacting and how he's adapting. But there's a lot of, again, like in Red Dog, there are a few characters and there are a few subplots. But yeah, primarily I think it is like the way John was in Red Dog, the protagonist, so is our character Mick.
But you killed him too.
Yeah. But we don't kill the boy. We don't kill the boy.
That's a relief. I'm so relieved. One thing that when I first saw Red Dog in the cinema that hit me right away was the incredibly strong use of music. And it's, I think also screening a lot of the films that I was looking at in preparation for this, and family films, the way music is used is so interesting because you can really tell kids in particular what kind of scene it is. I mean, just watching the little clip we showed before of The Little Rascals, it's a horrifying scene. There's tiny, tiny little like toddlers and children trying to put out a huge fire. It's a really, if you had put scary music to that scene, it would have been one kind of scene, but it's very comical light music. And I'm just wondering, you know, in terms of the music, was that very much you with Red Dog, the choices that were made?
No, it was all of us really. It was very much. It was also in the script, and that's again what I loved about the script. I went, yeah, you know, and it was going back. It was accessing all those great '70s songs that I love and recontextualizing them, and you know, it was embedded in the script. So that was very much just a great thing to read, knowing, okay, a lot of them changed because we couldn't afford them or we couldn't get the full rights. But Nelson, you know, is very involved in that, and you know, he set aside a certain amount of the budget for licensing, and I don't know if you've ever met Nelson, but he is a tough negotiator. He's what I call an entrepreneurial producer, old school, and he'll strike a deal. So he's very aggressive, and we got great deals. You know, we got really good songs in there eventually. But yeah, it was very much a discussion. And in the edit, it changes. It's so funny because, like in the last film, you know, we've got similar sort of montages and sequences, and you know, we go through 5 songs to get the right fit, both creatively and also financially.
One of the things that came up a lot in the panel discussion was this idea of Australian-ness and what that means in terms of films. Were you in both Red Dog and True Blue, were you sort of conscious of conveying Australian values or an Australian voice, or is it just something that is natural and came naturally to you?
Yeah, very conscious of it. Especially, you know, there is something there, as Seth said, the larrikin, you know, that is something that I think that even outsiders love about us and we love about ourselves. And what I loved about the first film, it was about, you know, it was what I call, you know, these classic Australian traits. You know, we're an egalitarian country, or at least I think we like to think we are, don't we? Even though we don't show it. And that's what I think is key to the film, and to both films, is that it's something, I don't know, I don't want to get political here, but I saw some interviews with Kerry O'Brien and Paul Keating. It was 4 hours interviews, and the very last interview, the very last question was, you know, what is Australia? And Paul Keating says, I don't know. I still don't know. I don't think we know who we are yet as a country. And what I love about the Red Dog films is I think that they go somewhere to starting to address that question, in that they reflect old values, but also the films are also looking at change, you know, and how we've always changed as a country, and we're changing. And change is a very big theme in Red Dog, True Blue. And what I'm really proud of is there's a very strong Indigenous story in Red Dog, True Blue as well. And what I think is very important to tell is both white and black Australian stories, not just black Australian stories, not just Australian stories, but also white and black Australia together. To me, that's a very important theme and subject. And that's what I mean, there's such a rich seam of themes, of ideas, of conflicts, of questions that we as Australians can explore in our stories that are both local and universal. So I think Red Dog is very much about Australia. And in fact, when I look at all my films, the common theme, they're all looking at aspects of Australia, but they're also genre films, and they also kind of hopefully can work outside of that. But I think it's something not to shy away from. It's something to embrace and explore, because there's still so much to mine, as I keep saying.
Seph, can you tell me, how will True Blue be marketed, positioned, released differently from the first one?
With confidence. I'd say with all guns blazing, Battleship going into the marketplace very, very confidently. So our date is December 26th, which is Boxing Day. It's historically the best performing day on the Australian calendar in the year. And it's a signal. It's a signal to the industry that we and our friends in the exhibition community that we believe in the film, and we are going to strongly support the film. So whereas in the first Red Dog, we didn't know what we had until we were in it. Now we know exactly what we have and what we need to do to find the audience, which is community. Our whole push is about community that loved the first Red Dog, but finding a new generation of kids. The kids that loved Red Dog, many of them are possibly aged out of being ideally suited to this demographic, but the parents remember, the grandparents remember, and we have a whole new group of kids to bring in. So we know exactly where we want to be. We're going to go out on a lot of screens. There's no chance that it's not going to be playing at a cinema or multiplex near you. We have a strong partnership going with ICA, the Independent Cinema Association of Australia, which tends to represent a lot of the regional screens in the country where our local films tend to overperform compared to norms, which is exciting for us. And because it's a brand now, because when you talk about Red Dog, everyone knows what you're talking about, it's much easier to go into the marketplace and find all your supporting players, people who are going to come on board for branding, people who are going to come on board for third-party support, people who are going to get you into stores and get the marketplace excited. So you will know it's there.
Which leads conveniently to my last question before we go to questions from the audience, which is Red Dog 3 in development?
Well, Nelson, it's really up to Nelson. As I said, he's the dad, and Nelson throws everything into these films, more than I do. His job is really starting now. He's going to be working hand in hand with Roadshow, releasing the film, and I think by the end of the year he'll be exhausted, and I think the thought of another Red Dog film will be the first thing from his mind. But knowing Nelson, if the film does well, we're hoping, and we have spoken about what Disney call an interquel, which would be a story between this film and the first film. And I don't want to give too much away, but we're amongst friends, so I'm pushing for a story about, set in Broome, about the pearling industry.
Ooh. And
a sea story. So Sea Dog. So, yeah, because I love Jaws, and I want to do Jaws. So I want to have 3 men on a boat and a dog.
Excellent. Okay. Now, do we have any questions? Yes. Diana, just at the back.
This is a question for Seph. You mentioned, was it ICA, who you were in association with, that screens regionally, and it's a high performer, the regions? And given our 2 case studies so far, how important do you think it is to have a regional story?
That's a very interesting question. Brian Rosen, who at one time headed the previous incarnation of Screen Australia, apparently has done a whole thesis on the importance of it being rural stories as opposed to urban stories. And just a quick think of what has worked suggests that might be the case. I think that Australian values and what Australia's a very urban place. You know, most of us are either living in a capital city or living near a capital city on the coast. But the values that we purport to embrace tend to be informed by the outback and by rural Australia. Like Joan and I were talking about at one point. I read when I first got here and was trying to hoover up all I could about Australian film. There's a tiny little book, The Pocket Guide to Australian Films. I think Saskia Vanderbilt, but I could be getting that wrong. It's been a while now. At the very end, she made a point. Australia came of age as a nation in 1901. Filmmaking came to the fore right about the same time. Propaganda films to entice British immigration into Australia were made at that time and going forwards into the 10s and 20s. And they were promulgating a certain sense of Australian values and what it was like here, and mateship and fair play and equality. And it's those values that were in those films that we're still talking about today without realizing that the origin of those stories come from filmmaking. And I think films like Red Dog and Blue Dog and Oddball and Paper Planes are all, possibly without knowing it, continuing a rich heritage of doing exactly that. They're telling us who we are and what our values should be. My favorite bits in Red Dog are the relationship between Pito, Jocko, and Vano, who, the John Batchelor character is closing his door and doing, listening to Sousa marches and doing knitting. I mean, it's just a fabulous way of portraying the warmth of what we like to think we are about. And for some reason, that's easier to do in rural settings.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Peck. Is that on? Yes. I'm Adrienne Pekatic from the Independent Cinemas Association, and I just wanted to add an observation to the marketing, because I started at ICA. I spent 20 years working for Reg Grundy, and so I had a very strong association with Australian productions and successful Australian content. And when I came into this, I asked my members, my independent cinema members, did they support Australian films? And I got a resounding, well, yes. And the yes was very much, wasn't qualified really in the sense of it being an Australian film, but it, as one of our previous speakers said, it depended on the story. And family films were something that they were crying out for, and that they, very early on in my association with this sector, had identified. And in Red Dog, one of the quirks of fate that had really made a difference between this film, apart from the fantastic campaign, obviously, that Roadshow did and the efforts of the director and the producer, was that moving of the date. The teaser trailer, Dennis Parks told me this story. He runs the Picture Show Man Cinema in Merimbula, and he saw that teaser trailer when it was first released by Roadshow, and he saw real potential in that. He loved it. You've got to get through the exhibitor before you can get to the exhibitor's audience. And he played that trailer, and Roadshow moved the date. So he played that trailer for 6 months. Now, if you're thinking about word of mouth and you're thinking about the marketing footprint of a Disney movie on every bus stop in the country, and the capacity for an Australian film to get through to the awareness of both the Australian exhibitor and then the Australian audience, that was the most marvellous quirk of fate that could have possibly happened. And the rest is history, as they say. But we have been working since then. I've been working with my board members and working with Screen Australia and working with the team at Roadshow, and generally speaking, in trying to identify how can we raise awareness for Australian films. And one of the issues, though, is around the story. And just to your earlier point about, the character of family films, the tone, and whether they should be dark or light or how that should be. One of the challenges that I've had, and I'm so grateful for this family film initiative, is that it's very difficult for the exhibitor to find an Australian film that is not going to be narrow release. They are predominantly art house small independent art house pictures. And the sorts of films that we're talking about today, which are broad release family films, will be embraced by my member exhibitors and by their audiences. And I just wanted to add that little bit in about the Red Dog incredible success and the fact that you've got to get in there and market early. Thank you.
You're here.
Hello. Hi, I'm Steve, one of the originating producers of Oddball. I'd like to thank Kriv for making dogs in. Thank you. And it's with that in that, I pitched Seph, and he said, great, if you get Bindi in it, we're in. That's how long ago it was. But also, I really kind of made Oddball for Village, with Village, and it was based on Red Dog, of the type of film we were going to make, and it was going to be over 50s. That was the marketing push. We had Shane Jacobson, we aged him up, put a beard on him, and I thought, well, that's going to be the poster. We're going to have Shane, there's going to be a little dog, and then maybe a little girl in the background. But obviously the market moves, and we have paper planes, and suddenly Oddball gets being talked about as a kids' film. And, there's one meeting I remember when one of the directors, we had a few directors on Oddball, one of the directors started talking about Oddball as a kids' film, and you got up from the table, Seph, and said, if you're making a kids' film, we're not interested. And it's just, I know, we're in a family, and of course, Oddball was marketed as a kids' film, eventually. And I want to bring up that, this is a family film initiative, but there's a lot of kind of bleeding down into the kids' film area, and that there's a big distinction. I know your family can watch a movie that kids will like too, but then if you're watching the kids' film, there's about a 10-year loop that you have to go through until you can get out of that horror as a parent. And I think it's just worth having conversation here about the difference of a kids' film and family film. But and to note, in the market it does change when you are making an over 50s family film for Village, and then when it gets delivered, it can be turned into a kids' film.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that's one of the reasons Blinky Bill didn't do the numbers that Oddball or Red Dog or Paper Planes did, because it's a kids' film, it's not a family film.
It's easily confused what we're talking about. So kids, you're aiming very young. They tend to be in cinema at adults at kids' prices. It's that much harder to do. Mike's hello. It's a narrow. When we say kids, it's a narrower demographic. When we say families, it's a larger demographic. Paper Planes taught us that we could aim the campaign younger, but we weren't giving up on our over 50 audience in any way. We were actually just energizing our younger audience to be a bigger part of it. But it was not either or, like Blinky Bill was. You were more locked into just kids with that one. So it's moving feast, but it's moving in the right direction, which is I'm very optimistic about.
Sorry.
Hello. I'm just wondering about ratings in your family film. Oh, sorry, my name's Russell Kilby. In your family film package, it had to be G-rated. Is that right? And I'm just wondering what you guys think of the difference between a PG and a G. Is it a lot of bucks, or is it okay to be PG rather than G?
It's okay to be PG, from our perspective. The advertising that you can do, the trailering you can do, gets more restrictive as you go up the rating scale. But the difference between G and PG isn't huge. You are with a G, you are sending a signal to the audience that this is very safe, very safe. PG, there's a slight question mark, but it's not huge difference. Big difference between a PG and an M. and then a huge difference between an M and an MA15.
Oh, sorry.
Hi. One of the things that's really interesting about Red Dog, and maybe this comes from the fact that when you made it, you didn't maybe know that it was a family film so much, is the fact that there is no kid character in it. There is obviously a dog, which helps with the family side, but if we keep animations to the side and talk about live action family films, one of the things that they talk about in story writing, and this also comes in script, is about if you have a child character, about orphaning that child character, whether that be literally like Harry Potter or metaphorically like Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, where they get sent to stay with an uncle that doesn't care. And that gives the children the ability to then have the adventure. And so then what I'm kind of interested in is then how you treat adults within a family film. Like Paper Planes, the dad is a huge part of the film. But then sometimes when you're making, and this maybe is the difference between family films and kids films, when you have a kid character, sometimes the adults can really sit in the peripheral vision of the film. So I just would like to, I'm interested to know, because the second Red Dog, Blue Dog, now has a child character. So I'm interested just to discuss about how, and maybe from a marketing perspective as well, how you treat adults in a family film, so that it's a family film as opposed to a kids film and appeals to both levels.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm happy to just address that generally. I mean, the interesting thing is, in a lot of my favorite family films, or the films that my daughter and her age group loved, were very much family films because they had kids saving adults. So the adults, in one way, were what's at stake. So, for example, The Parent Trap is a classic example of that, where you have twin sisters who decide to get their parents back together. So the parents, you've actually got a film that's so clever because you have really high stakes story with the little girls, but you also have a rom-com with two very famous actors. So you've got a fantastic casting opportunity to put two big stars in the roles as adults, and they also have a journey and they have to come back together. So as you say in Paper Planes, the question is, will Sam Worthington get over his depression and the fact that his wife has died? That's a big strand in the story, but it's definitely the sort of B strand that I think works subtextually through the central driving question, which is, will this kid win the paper plane competition? And I think the best family films have that sort of relationship between the kid characters and the adults. Same in Home Alone, same in Swiss Family Robinson, same in Tiger Bay, and certainly in Oddball. So I'd actually love to know, though, whether the second Red Dog film, whether you do also have adult stories at stake.
That's a really interesting question that we definitely do, and I don't even think of the child character as any different from the adult character. It's just as important. And I, as an adult, I actually love watching children as lead characters. I'm fascinated by children and by how they work in the story. So to me, it's an even playing field. It doesn't matter as long as the story works. And I think if the story works holistically, it's going to appeal to all ages. And the child character will be just as compelling as the adult character, and vice versa. So in True Blue, it's without giving too much away, it's pretty much a classic rites of passage story about a boy who comes to this cattle station and interacts with all the characters there, an older grandfather and some of the station hands and an Indigenous boy, and so it's him coming to terms with who he is, the changes he's going to have to confront, and then there's all the other characters as well, the changes that they're having to kind of cope with. So it's all, it's to me, it's what's lovely about those kinds of stories is that they're a little bit like they're a prism through which you can look, you can hold it up and you can look at it through a number of angles. Yeah.
And I'm afraid we're going to have to stop there so that we can get some lunch into us. But thank you so much, and we'll be back here at 2 o'clock.